This is a Tibet House Member video and is a part of the Force for Good class series, now available at tibethouse.us.
Book, Central Tibetan Buddhism book I did a long time ago, called The Three Principles of the Path. And the three principles of the path are called transcendent renunciation, or transcendence, simply by me, at least, and universal compassion and the spirit of enlightenment is the second one. And the third one is the wisdom of the twofold selflessness. So renunciation or transcendent renunciation, universal compassion, and the twofold wisdom of twofold selflessness, which means the wisdom that understands the nature of reality. So those are the three principles of the path. And the first one, transcendence, that is essential. You know, if you, in regard to Tantra, if you hear about Tantra, those of you, I bet a lot of you have heard about Tantra, if not already practice it. And one of the things people advertise Tantra about is they say, well, you use passions in the path. You can use anger in the path. You can use delusion in the path. You know, you can use what are normally addictive mental states or mental addictions, what I call mental addictions, the kleshas. You can use those kleshas, transmute the energy, and then use them in the path rather than just suppress them, which in the exoteric system you're supposed to kind of control them or suppress them. So then everyone gets all excited about that, the idea of using passion in the path, of various kinds of passions and delusions in the path. But the point is, you can't use the raw material in the path. In other words, if it's still the level where they have you under their spell, you're not going to be using anything, they're going to still be using you. And this, of course, is one of the reasons Tantra is esoteric, because if people right away go into sort of indulging their passions by thinking that I'm doing Tantra, they're going to go nuts. And so to protect them, it's esoteric, not just to hide something from them, but to protect them. So the first level of, the first principle of the path, transcendent renunciation, a person has to have achieved a certain distance from their mental addictions, so that they already know, through kind of mindfulness, through a kind of a self-analysis, through an examination of the nature of the passions, that when anger or lust or delusion grips you, where you feel helpless in its flow, then you are not able to use that anger or that lust or passion or delusion. You can't use it because it's using you. It's just driving you, and there's no way you can practice that Tantra. So you have to have renounced a little bit that. You have to have decided that following these impulses is not good for me. Out of affection for yourself, out of consideration for yourself, you have developed some distance from your gut reactions, from your gut impulses. That's number one. Then you have to be motivated by universal compassion for all beings. You have to have the bodhisattva motivation, because otherwise you really don't have a reason to put the pressure on yourself that you do when you undertake Tantra. I remember Taratuku used to laugh, one of my greatest teachers. He used to laugh about Westerners who, they just jump to get a tantric initiation. Like, oh yeah, I want that one. I want to get that wang, or this wang, you know, what they call, by translating from Tibetan, they call empowerment, which is actually not a really good translation. That kind of initiation or consecration. And, but they don't really, and then Bodhisattva vow, they sort of think, well, that's cool, but they're not a little worried about that. I'm going to save all beings. Well, I don't really know if I can do that type of thing. But then monks vow, oh no, oh terrible, oh that would be awful. Oh, I couldn't do that. Oh, I couldn't give up my beer. I couldn't give up my whatever, celibacy. I couldn't give up my property and have a vow of poverty and all that. So that would be really difficult. Meanwhile, that's really easy to be a renunciant and not have to worry about, property and family and paying tuition to in the over-expensive colleges for children and having children, and not to worry about all that is actually easy. The tantric vows of not letting your impulses control you and yet being aware of those deeper energies in your system, that's really difficult. Really difficult. It's like dealing with your unconscious, you're pushing your vow into the area of the unconscious where even your unconscious impulses are breaking your vow. Not to mention the physiological yogas involved in Tantra. So he used to laugh about it. Oh yeah, they really think that's hard, but they think this tantric thing is really easy, which is wrong. So that's the thing. So therefore in Lam Rim, now we're doing Lam Rim, you begin, let's meditate together now. The way you begin Lam Rim is you create the field within which you practice the stages of the path. Oh yeah, well finally, before we meditate, let me say last thing. In the order of the Dalai Lamas, of the Tsongkhapa and so forth, the new Kadampa order as it's called originally, or the Ganden order, the order of the joyous Tushita, or the Gelugpa order, which means the virtuous ones, was their later name for it, beginning in the 15th century, which was just a continuation of the order coming from Atisha in the 11th century, and Dromdamba. But in that, the thing that people do when they do tantric retreat, where before that there's a preliminary, and one of the preliminaries is 100,000 vows, then there's 100,000 mandala offerings, then there's 100,000 guru pujas, and there's these 100,000s of things that takes people sometimes years to do. Well, understanding the Lam Rim is considered the equivalent of that for an intelligent person. So it's physically easier, but mentally not. But physically easier, in a way. But that just shows how profound and how extraordinary they feel that it is, okay? So, okay, now let's meditate on the refuge field, as it's called, where first thing you do to get into that refuge field is you look into yourself, at least the way I like to teach it. You're sitting meditating, you get ready to sit and meditate, and the first thing you do is you look into yourself, as if you could sort of get outside of your face and look back into your face. And then looking into your face, you sort of look through your face to your brain, to your nervous system, to your heart chakra, your emotion center, whatever, and you look to find your identity, your real identity, your real self. Okay? And when you turn on yourself to look for yourself, if you're honest with yourself, you don't really find anything. You don't find yourself sitting on your breastbone. You don't find yourself as a tattoo on your sort of one of the chambers of the heart. You don't find it stamped in the pituitary gland or in some particular neuronal pattern in your brain where there's just flows of energy going around. And so you will get a little dizzy when you turn to look for yourself, for your sense of self. And then in this case, you let yourself melt away, so to speak. You rehearse dissolving yourself. When you don't find a real self, a fixed thing that is sort of reflects back to you, oh, this is me. You don't find that, but you feel it should be there, but you don't find it. When that happens, you feel dizzy when you do it with concentration. And in this case, instead of like being freaked by the dizziness and coming back to asserting control, looking at something, you let yourself melt down. You decide to, in your mind, whether through a verbal articulation or just when you get used to it, just a kind of a letting go process, you decide that you're not certain what you are. You sort of disappear under your own analysis. And you become, therefore, open potential. There's still a sense of presence that you have, but it's sort of open of any sort of mask, persona, mask. Persona means mask, by the way. Your identity, your real self, okay? And along when your sort of sense of what you really are dissolves under that analysis, your sense of what's around you dissolves as well. For example, my imagining myself as Bob Thurman today on a Sunday night doesn't divorce me from anticipating being myself when I'm doing some work tomorrow, or when I'm concentrating on something, or when I stumble and twist an ankle, or whatever might happen to me. I don't radically speciate myself into being something other than those fortunate ones who are already there in the cars, or who are already there in the whatever it is. So you let yourself and your world picture, your maintained world picture, just dissolve under analysis, under this brief self-investigation. And then what you do is your mind is open. When you dissolve under analysis, it doesn't mean you become nothing. It means that you didn't find yourself as a fixed thing the way you thought you were there. So then what you do is you arise then in your ideal balanced embodiment, with the field of vision in front of you, perhaps, which is usual for two-eyed beings who are always going in one direction. And so body and mind, you sort of say, well, boy, that's a relief. My body wasn't infinity and my mind wasn't trapped in some sort of inner thing. My body and mind are connected to body and mind of Buddhahood. And we actually want to help spread that more, to make it more known in some other parts of the world. So then you arise in your ideal meditative form, and you sort of sit up, and you sort of feel like, I'm perfectly balanced, I'm perfectly calm, I'm perfectly good. And imitating what we did when we were in the other form of Buddha, you think of yourself as perfectly balanced, perfectly alert, yet perfectly calm. And then you imagine above you in the sky, you forget about some ceiling over you if you're indoors, and you imagine in the sky above you the most amazing enlightened being you can think of. In my case, it might be Manjushri, or His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or historically it could be Shakyamuni Buddha, or all of the above, and Vimalakirti, something. And you imagine they are there, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, Manjushri Bodhisattva, Saraswati, the goddess of art and wisdom. And you imagine that they are there and they are seeing our eyeball. And the light is flooding down from them to us, filling us up with a bright light, soothing light, energizing light, beautiful light. And then in addition to that, around us are all beings then imagine around you are all beings, so that when that light comes to you and you start shining and feeling energized by it, this reflects itself, it overflows and reflects to all the beings around you. And make sure that among all the beings are your loved ones, neutral ones, and enemies, rivals, beings that you think of as highly unpleasant. They're all there in subtle body form, and you're trying to cultivate your equanimity, your equality, perception of them as equal to each other and to you. So that's the beginning of setting of Lam Rim, and it is said that when you meditate these three principles of the path in that setting, that you will make much bigger progress. Your progress will be incredibly empowered by the presence of this ancient teacher. Okay, ding. So let's begin. So now we begin the first thing. Now this brings up another really important point, and that is business of former and future life. I presume, how many of you